Unfall. Unfall. Da war's.
The blizzard outside the Moretti estate was cold enough to kill a man in minutes, but the hearts of the people inside were even colder. While the city's elite sipped vintage Dom Perignon and laughed by the roaring fireplace, a young maid named Clara was clawing at the frozen glass of the patio doors, begging to be let back in. She had been sent out into the storm as a cruel punishment, wearing nothing but her thin uniform. No one cared. No one noticed, until the most dangerous man in the underworld, Tony Moretti, walked to the window to watch the snowfall and saw a body buried in the drift. What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was a reckoning that would burn the entire mansion to the ground. The thermometer on the wall of the servants' quarters read 68 degrees. But upstairs in the grand ballroom of the Moretti estate in Aspen, Colorado, the atmosphere was stiflingly hot. It was Christmas Eve, the most important night on the social calendar for the East Coast crime families. Clara Thorne adjusted the white lace collar of her uniform, her fingers trembling. It wasn't from the cold, not yet, but from pure, unadulterated fear. She had been working at the Moretti estate for only 3 months, taking the job to pay off her father's gambling debts to a loan shark in Chicago. She tried to be invisible. She tried to be a ghost. But when you worked for Tony Moretti, the capo dei capi, and his vicious fiancée, Lana Vance, invisibility was a luxury you couldn't afford. Lana Vance was a woman sculpted from jealousy and old money. She was beautiful in the way a diamond is beautiful, sharp, hard, and capable of cutting you if you held it wrong. She hated Clara, not because Clara had done anything wrong, but because 3 weeks ago, Tony had complimented Clara's coffee. That one moment of kindness from the Ice King himself had painted a target on Clara's back. "You there?" "Go." Clara froze, balancing a silver tray loaded with crystal flutes of Chateau Margaux. She turned to see Lana standing by the massive French doors that led to the terrace. Lana was wearing a crimson Valentino gown that cost more than Clara would earn in 10 years. Her eyes, however, were predatory. "Yes, Miss Vance," Clara whispered, lowering her head. "I seem to have dropped my earring." Lana said, her voice loud enough to attract the attention of her sycophantic friends, but quiet enough to escape the notice of the men talking business in the corner. "My diamond stud, the one Tony gave me for our engagement." Clara scanned the polished marble floor. I can help you look for it here, miss." "Oh, I didn't drop it here, you stupid girl," Lana sneered, sipping her wine. "I was getting some fresh air. I dropped it on the terrace." Clara looked at the glass doors. Beyond them, a white void swirled violently. The weatherman had called it the storm of the century. The wind was howling at 50 miles per hour, and the temperature had plummeted to 10 degrees below zero. "Miss Vance," Clara stammered, her knuckles turning white on the tray. It's a blizzard out there. Perhaps we can wait until the storm passes, or I can ask the groundskeeper to—" Lana stepped forward, her hand lashing out. She didn't hit Clara. Instead, she slapped the bottom of the silver tray. Crash! The crystal flutes shattered against the marble. Red wine splattered across the hem of Lana's pristine gown and soaked into Clara's apron. The sound silenced the nearby conversation. "Look what you've done!" Lana shrieked, playing the victim instantly. "You clumsy idiot! You've ruined my dress!" Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, a woman who had long ago sold her soul to stay on. Lana's good side rushed over. "Clara! My God, what is wrong with you?" She hit the tray. Clara gasped, tears pricking her eyes. "Liar," Lana hissed. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You are going to go out there, and you are going to find my earring. If you don't, I will tell Tony you stole it. And you know what the Morettis do to thieves, don't you? They don't just fire them. They make them disappear." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Clara knew the stories. She knew about the concrete shoes and the missing fingers. She looked at Mrs. Gable for help, but the older woman just sneered. "Go on, then," Mrs. Gable barked, "and don't come back in until you have it." Mrs. Gable unlocked the heavy French door. The wind slammed it open, blasting snow into the warm room. The guests nearby laughed, thinking it was some sort of drunken game. "Go," Lana commanded. Trembling Clara stepped out. She wasn't wearing a coat. She wasn't wearing boots, just her thin, standard-issue black flats and her cotton uniform. As soon as she crossed the threshold, the cold hit her like a physical blow. It sucked the air from her lungs. Before she could turn back to beg for a coat, the door slammed shut behind her. Click. The lock engaged. Clara turned, pounding on the glass. "Please, just let me get a coat, please." Inside. Lana turned her back to the window, laughing as she signaled a waiter for another drink. Mrs. Gable pulled the heavy velvet drapes shut, blocking out the view of the storm. Blocking out Clara. Clara was alone in the whiteout. She wrapped her arms around herself, her teeth chattering instantly. "Okay," she sobbed to herself. "Okay. Just find the earring. 5 minutes. Just find it." She dropped to her knees in the snow. It was already a foot deep. She began to sift through the freezing powder, her fingers going numb within seconds. She crawled across the patio stones, feeling for the hard edge of a diamond. 1 minute passed. Then 5. Then 10. The cold wasn't just on her skin anymore. It was in her blood. Her movements became sluggish. Her vision began to blur. She crawled toward the door again, banging on the glass, but her hands were so frozen they felt like blocks of wood. She couldn't feel the impact. She screamed, but the wind tore the sound from her throat and scattered it into the night. They aren't going to open the door, she realized with a terrifying clarity. Lana doesn't want the earring. She wants me dead. Clara slumped against the stone railing of the terrace, the snow piling up around her legs. Her eyelids felt heavy. The biting cold was replaced by a strange, seductive warmth. It was the final stage of hypothermia. She curled into a ball, her head resting on her knees, looking like nothing more than a discarded pile of laundry in the snow. Inside the mansion, the party raged on. The scent of roasted duck and pine needles filled the air. But in the private study on the second floor, Tony Moretti was getting restless. Tony Enzo Moretti was not a man who enjoyed parties. He tolerated them, as the dawn of the Moretti crime family appearances were a necessary evil. He had to show strength, wealth, and unity, especially with the rumors of the Russo family trying to encroach on his territory in New York. He stood by the fireplace in his mahogany-paneled study, nursing a glass of 50-year-old Scotch. He was 6'4", built like a heavyweight boxer, with eyes the color of stormy seas, and a jawline that could cut glass. He was 32 years old, and already the most feared man on the East Coast. "Enzo, darling." He didn't turn around. He knew that voice. It was Lana. "What is it, Lana?" "You've been up here for an hour," she whined, entering the room and draping her arms around his waist from behind. "The guests are asking for you. Senator Miller wants to discuss the sanitation contracts." Tony sighed, stepping away from her touch. He walked to his desk and set the glass down. "I'll be down in a minute. I just need quiet." He looked at her. She was flushed, breathless, and oddly excited. There was a manic energy to her tonight that unsettled him. "You look tense," Lana said, running a hand down the lapel of his Brioni suit. "You need to relax. I took care of a little pest problem downstairs. The night is going to be perfect." "Pest problem?" Tony raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, nothing. Just staff issues. Mrs. Gable handled it." She smiled a little too widely. "Come down. I want to dance." Tony stared at her. He had never truly loved Lana. Their engagement was a strategic alliance between the Morettis and the Vances, a banking family that washed money for the cartel. But lately, her cruelty was becoming hard to ignore. "Go," he said, his voice low. "I'll be down in 5 minutes." Lana pouted, but left closing the door behind her. Tony exhaled, loosening his tie. He walked to the window. His study overlooked the rear terrace and the sprawling gardens that led down to the frozen lake. The blizzard was raging harder now. The floodlights mounted on the roof cut through the driving snow, illuminating the patio in stark white relief. He watched the snow swirl, mesmerized by the violence of nature. It was the only thing in the world he couldn't control. His gaze drifted down to the patio directly below the ballroom. The snow was pristine, untouched, piling up in drifts against the stone balustrade. Except for one spot. Tony squinted. There was a lump against the far railing. It looked like a sack of potatoes, or perhaps a cushion from the outdoor furniture that the staff had forgotten to bring in. He took a sip of scotch, about to turn away. Then the lump moved. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible shift. A hand falling from a knee. Tony's heart stopped. He dropped his glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, amber liquid splashing everywhere. But he didn't hear it. He pressed his face against the cold glass of the window. That wasn't a cushion. That was a person. He saw the black fabric, the white lace of a collar. A maid. "What the hell?" he muttered. He threw the window latch open, ignoring the blast of freezing air that invaded the room. He leaned out. "Hey," he roared into the wind. "Who is that?" No response. The figure was still. The snow was already covering the shoulders, burying the hair. Tony didn't think. He didn't call security. He didn't buzz Mrs. Gable. The instinct that had kept him alive in the Mafia wars kicked in the instinct to protect what was his. And everyone in this house, down to the lowest scullery maid, was his responsibility. He spun around and sprinted for the door. He moved through the hallway like a thunderstorm, bypassing the grand staircase and taking the servants' stairs 2 at a time. He burst into the kitchen, startling the chefs. "Boss," the head chef stammered. "Out of my way," Tony roared. He kicked open the back service door that led to the patio. The wind howled, trying to push him back, but Tony was an immovable force. He stepped out into the snow, his Italian leather shoes sinking instantly. "Hello," he shouted. He waded through the drift, the cold biting through his suit instantly. If he was this cold after 10 seconds, he couldn't imagine what the person on the ground was feeling. He reached the figure and fell to his knees. He grabbed the shoulder and turned the person over. Tony's breath hitched. It was the new girl. Clara. He remembered her. He remembered her because she was the only person in this house who didn't look at him with fear or greed. She looked at him with a quiet sadness that mirrored his own. She had soft brown eyes and hands that looked like they had worked hard every day of her life. Now her face was pale, almost blue. Her lips were cracked and purple. Her eyelashes were frozen together with ice crystals. "Clara," he growled, shaking her. "Clara, wake up!" She didn't respond. Her skin was terrifyingly cold to the touch. Tony placed a hand on her neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, faint, thready, fluttering like a dying bird. She was dying. Right here, 20 feet from where his guests were eating caviar. A rage unlike anything Tony had ever felt exploded in his chest. It wasn't the cold, calculated anger of a businessman. It was the hot, molten fury of a predator whose territory had been violated. He scooped her up in his arms. She was impossibly light, like a hollow bone. Her head lolled back against his shoulder, her ice-cold cheek pressing against his neck. "I've got you," he whispered fiercely into her frozen ear. "I've got you. Don't you dare die on me." He stood up, cradling her against his chest, shielding her from the wind with his own body. He turned back toward the house. Through the glass of the French doors, he could see the party. He saw Lana laughing, holding court with a glass of wine in her hand. He saw Mrs. Gable smirk at a waiter. They looked comfortable. They looked happy. Tony kicked the door. Thud. He kicked it again, harder. Thud. Inside, the music stopped. Heads turned. Tony didn't wait for someone to unlock it. He stepped back, shifted Clara's weight securely in his arms, and raised his heavy boot. With a roar of exertion, he smashed his heel into the lock mechanism. Wood splintered. Metal screeched. The double doors flew open, banging against the interior walls with a violence that made half the room scream. Wind and snow swirled into the ballroom, followed by Tony Moretti. He looked like a demon rising from the ice. His hair was windswept, his suit covered in snow, his eyes burning with a lethal fire. And in his arms he held the frozen, limp body of the maid. The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the howling wind from the open door behind him. Lana dropped her glass. Tony scanned the room, his gaze landing on his fiancée. "Who?" Tony's voice was a low rumble, quiet but terrifying enough to reach every corner of the silent hall. "Who put her out there?" No one spoke. Tony stepped into the light, tightening his grip on Clara. "I said, who locked the door?" The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by the whistling of the storm entering through the shattered doors. Tony stood there, a titan of rage water dripping from his suit, the unconscious girl pressed against his chest. His eyes swept across the room, landing on faces he had known for years. Politicians, business partners, mob capos. None of them dared to meet his gaze. "I asked a question," Tony said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "Who put her out there?" Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, stepped forward, trembling. She wrung her hands, her face pale. "Mr. Moretti?" "Sir, it was a disciplinary measure. She broke a tray. She was insubordinate." "Insubordinate." Tony repeated the word as if it tasted like poison. He looked down at Clara's blue-tinged face. "So you sentenced her to death?" No, sir," Mrs. Gable stammered. "She was just supposed to look for Miss Vance's earring. We didn't know she was still out there. We thought she had come back in through the kitchen." "Liar," Tony spat. "The door was locked. I had to kick it in." He turned his gaze to Lana. She was standing by the buffet table, her face a mask of indignation rather than guilt. She set her wine glass down with a sharp clink. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Enzo." Lana sighed, smoothing her dress. "Stop being so dramatic. She's just a maid. She's probably faking it to get attention. Look at her, she's filthy. You're ruining your suit." The room gasped. Even the hardened criminals in the room looked uncomfortable. Tony walked slowly toward Lana. Every step was heavy, deliberate. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. He stopped inches from her. The cold radiating off him was palpable. "Faking it," Tony whispered. He shifted Clara slightly so her frozen, lifeless hand dangled in front of Lana. "Touch her." "I will not." "Touch her!" Tony roared, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Lana flinched, terrified. She reached out a manicured finger and brushed Clara's hand. She recoiled instantly. "My God, she's ice." "She is dying," Tony said, his eyes boring into Lana's soul. "Because of an earring." "It was a diamond," Lana shrieked, her defense crumbling into petulance. "The one you gave me." "She lost it. She had to find it." Tony stared at her for a long, agonizing second. Then he looked at the engagement ring on her finger. "You value a stone over a human life. That is the difference between us, Lana. I kill enemies. You torture innocents." He turned his back on her, dismissing her existence entirely. Marco, his consigliere Marco, a man with a scar running down his cheek, and a darker soul than Tony's materialized from the shadows. "Boss, clear the room," Tony commanded. "Everyone out. The party is over." "But the senator," Marco started. "I don't care if the President of the United States is here. Get them out. Now, and call Dr. Harris. Tell him if he isn't here in 10 minutes, I'll burn his practice to the ground." "Yes, boss." As Marco began barking orders for the security team to usher the confused and frightened guests toward the exit, Tony looked at Mrs. Gable. "You," he said. Mrs. Gable whimpered. "Sir, I was just following orders." "Pack your bags," Tony said coldly. "You have 1 hour to leave this estate. If I see you on my property after that, the wolves in the forest will be eating well tonight." Mrs. Gable burst into tears and fled the room. Lana tried to grab Tony's arm as he walked toward the stairs. "Enzo, you can't be serious. You're humiliating me in front of everyone over a servant. Where are you going?" Tony didn't stop walking. "I'm taking her to the master suite." "The master suite!" Lana screamed, her face turning blotchy with rage. "That's our room. You can't put that filthy little rat in our bed." Tony stopped on the bottom step. He didn't turn around. "It's not our room, Lana. It's my room. And right now, you aren't welcome in it." He ascended the stairs carrying the girl who was slowly freezing to death in his arms, leaving his fiancée screaming amidst the ruins of the Christmas party. The master suite of the Moretti estate was a fortress of luxury. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, and the bed was large enough to sleep 4 people. But Tony saw none of the opulence. All he saw was the terrifying shade of blue on Clara's lips. He kicked the door shut and laid her gently on the silk sheets. She was so stiff, it felt like he was laying down a mannequin. "Hang on," he muttered, his hands moving fast. "Just hang on, Clara." He knew the protocol for hypothermia. He had spent time in the Italian Alps during his training years. You couldn't just throw them in a hot shower. The shock would stop her heart. You had to warm them slowly from the core. But first, the wet clothes had to go. Tony didn't hesitate. There was nothing sexual in his movements. It was purely clinical, fueled by desperation. He grabbed a pair of scissors from his desk drawer and cut the sodden, freezing uniform from her body. The fabric was stiff with ice. As the dress fell away, Tony's jaw tightened. Underneath the uniform, Clara was terrifyingly thin. Her ribs were visible against her pale skin. But what made Tony's blood boil were the bruises. Old yellow ones on her arms, fresh purple ones on her shins, and on her shoulder a distinct red mark, a handprint. Lana, he thought. Or Mrs. Gable. He stripped her down to her undergarments and pulled the thick down duvet over her. It wasn't enough. She was shivering now, violent, convulsive spasms that shook the entire bed. "Cold," she moaned, her eyes still squeezed shut. "So cold. Papa, I'm sorry." "Shh," Tony soothed, sitting on the edge of the bed. He grabbed the remote and cranked the room's thermostat to 85 degrees. He ran to the fireplace and threw 3 large logs onto the dying embers, stoking them until a roar of heat filled the room. The door burst open. Dr. Aris rushed in, carrying a black medical bag. He was breathless, his coat dusted with snow. "I'm here, Tony. Marco said it was urgent." "Hypothermia," Tony barked, moving aside but hovering close like a guard dog. "She was out in the blizzard for 20 minutes, maybe 30. Wet clothes. She's barely responsive." Dr. Aris's face went grave. He immediately began checking her vitals. He shone a light in her eyes, listened to her heart, and took her temperature. "Her core temp is 92, Aris said, working quickly to set up an IV drip. "She's in moderate hypothermia. The shivering is actually a good sign. It means her body is still fighting. If she stops shivering before she warms up, we're in trouble." "What do we do?" Tony asked, his fists clenched at his sides. He felt helpless, a feeling he despised. "Warm fluids," Aris said, hanging a bag of saline. "We need to get her core temperature up, and body heat, external heat sources." The doctor looked at Tony. "The electric blankets are good, but the most effective way to transfer heat in a situation like this, if we don't have a tub ready, is body-to-body contact. She needs a human radiator." Tony didn't blink. "Done." "Tony," Aris warned, lowering his voice. "She's a maid. You're the Don. If you get in that bed, I don't give a damn about titles, Aris. If she dies, I'm going to hold everyone in this house accountable, including myself." Tony stripped off his suit jacket, his tie, and his wet shirt. He kicked off his shoes and trousers, leaving himself in his boxers and undershirt. His body was a furnace of muscle and heat. He climbed into the bed, sliding under the covers behind Clara. The shock of her cold skin against his was jarring. It was like hugging a block of ice. But he didn't pull away. He pulled her flush against him, wrapping his large arms around her small frame, pressing her back against his chest. He tangled his legs with hers, trying to transfer as much warmth as possible. "It's okay," he whispered into her hair, which smelled of snow and cheap vanilla shampoo. "I'm here. You're safe." Clara groaned, her teeth chattering so hard he could feel the vibrations in his own bones. Please, don't lock the door." "The door is open," Tony murmured, rubbing her arms vigorously to stimulate blood flow. "No one is ever locking you out again." Dr. Aris watched them for a moment, surprised by the tenderness in the Mafia Boss's eyes. He had patched Tony up after knife fights and shootouts. He had seen him break men's fingers without blinking. He had never seen him look at anyone with this level of protectiveness. "I'll monitor her heart rate," Aris said quietly, pulling a chair up to the bed. "Keep talking to her. Keep her conscious if you can." For the next hour, the room was silent except for the crackling fire and Clara's ragged breathing. Tony lay there, holding her, becoming her anchor. Slowly, agonizingly, The violent shivering began to subside. Her skin began to lose that deathly, waxy texture. Clara stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open. Her vision was blurry. All she could feel was heat, intense, overwhelming heat, and a scent sandalwood scotch and something masculine and safe. She turned her head slightly and saw a wall of muscle. She looked up and saw a jawline rough with stubble. "Mr. Moretti," she rasped, her voice barely a squeak. Tony looked down, his grey eyes softening. "Easy. Don't try to move." Am I dead?" "No," Tony said firmly. "You're in my room. You're safe." Clara's eyes widened in panic. She tried to scramble away, but her limbs were heavy and weak. "Your room, Miss Vance. She'll kill me. She said she'd make me disappear." "Lana isn't here," Tony said, his voice hardening at the mention of his fiancée. He tightened his hold on her, just enough to keep her from hurting herself. "And she is never going to touch you again. Do you understand me?" Clara looked at him confused. Why did you come for me?" "Because," Tony said, brushing a damp strand of hair off her forehead, "I saw you, and I realized I had been blind for too long." Suddenly, the door to the bedroom rattled. "Enzo!" Lana's voice screeched from the hallway. "Open this door. I know you have that tramp in there. My father is on the phone." Clara flinched, burying her face in the pillow. "She's going to hurt me." Tony's expression shifted from protector to killer in a split second. He looked at Dr. Aris. "Stay with her. Keep her warm." "Tony, don't do anything rash," Aris warned. "Rash." Tony slid out of bed, grabbing a silk robe and tying it tight. He walked to the door, his movements fluid and deadly. "I'm way past rash, Doc." He ripped the door open. Lana was standing there, phone in hand, looking furious. But her fury evaporated the moment she saw Tony's face. "Enzo, my father wants to—" Tony snatched the phone from her hand and crushed it. He threw the shattered pieces against the wall. "You," Tony growled, pointing a finger in her face. "You are going to go downstairs. You are going to pack your things, and you are going to get out of my house." "You can't kick me out," Lana stammered, backing away. "The contract, the merger." "The merger is dead," Tony declared. "And if you say one more word, so are you." The fever broke just before dawn on Christmas morning. Clara woke up, but for a moment she thought she had died and gone to heaven. The bed she was lying in was softer than clouds. The air smelled of wood smoke and expensive cologne. She stretched her legs, expecting the cramping cold of the servants' quarters, but instead, she felt warm flannel sheets against her skin. She opened her eyes. The room was bathed in the soft grey light of a snowy morning. It was massive, easily 4 times the size of the apartment she grew up in. "You're awake." Clara jumped, pulling the duvet up to her chin. Tony Moretti was sitting in a leather armchair by the fire, reading a file. He looked different than the terrifying boss she had glimpsed from the shadows for the past 3 months. He was wearing a dark grey cable-knit sweater and sweatpants. He looked human. But the gun resting on the side table next to his coffee cup was a stark reminder of who he was. "Mr. Moretti," Clara whispered. I should get up. I have to prep the breakfast service. Mrs. Gable will kill me." Tony closed the file and stood up. "Mrs. Gable is gone, Clara, and you are not prepping breakfast. You are eating it." He walked over to a rolling cart and pushed it toward the bed. It was laden with silver platters, pancakes, fruit eggs, and freshly squeezed juice. "I don't understand," Clara said, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this? I'm just a maid." "No," Tony said, sitting on the edge of the bed. His weight dipped the mattress, bringing him closer to her. "You are the woman I found freezing to death on my patio because my fiancé is a psychopath. You are my guest." He picked up a fork, stabbed a piece of melon, and held it out to her. "Eat." Clara hesitated, then took the bite. The sweetness exploded in her mouth. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. She ate quickly, forgetting her manners driven by a primal need for fuel. Tony watched her, a strange tightness in his chest. He poured her coffee. "Slow down. You'll make yourself sick." When she had eaten enough, she pushed the plate away. "Thank you. I've never had a meal like that." "Clara," Tony said, his tone shifting to business. "I need to know something. Last night, when you were shivering, you apologized to your father. You said you were sorry about the money." Clara froze. She looked down at her hands. "I ran a background check on you while you were sleeping." Tony continued, his voice calm but intense. "You're overqualified for this job. You have a degree in literature. You were a teacher. Why are you scrubbing floors for me?" Clara felt the tears welling up again. The shame was almost worse than the cold. "My father. He has a gambling problem. He got in deep with some bad people in Chicago. A loan shark named Vinny." "Vinny the Knuckles Gambino?" Tony asked, raising an eyebrow. Clara nodded. "He owes him $50,000. Vinny said if I didn't pay it off, he'd break my father's legs, then his neck. I took this job because the pay was high, and I send every cent back to Chicago." Tony stared at her. "You walked into a blizzard to find a diamond earring because you were afraid of losing a job that pays a debt to a low-level thug." "It's not low-level to me," Clara snapped, finding a sudden spark of courage. "It's my father's life. I don't have power like you, Mr. Moretti. I don't have guns and soldiers. I just have me." Tony looked at her, really looked at her, with a newfound respect. She wasn't weak. She was a warrior in a maid's uniform, fighting a war she couldn't win for a man who probably didn't deserve it. He reached for his phone on the nightstand. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. "Ring. Ring." "Yeah," a gravelly voice answered. "This is Vinny." "Vinny," Tony said smoothly. "This is Tony Moretti." There was a silence on the line, a terrified, choking silence. "Mr. Moretti? To what do I owe the honor? I pay my kickbacks to your cousins in Jersey." "This isn't about kickbacks," Tony said, his eyes locked on Clara's. "You hold a marker for a man named Arthur Thorne. 50 grand. Yeah, the deadbeat. His daughter is paying it off, though. She's a good kid." "The debt is cleared," Tony said. "Excuse me." "I said the debt is cleared, as of this second, and you are going to refund every penny the girl has sent you so far. You're going to wire it back to her account by noon." "But Mr. Moretti, that's my money." "Vinny." Tony's voice dropped an octave, becoming the voice of the devil himself. "Arthur Thorne is now under my protection. His daughter is under my protection. If you go near them, if you call them, if you even think about them, I will fly to Chicago and peel your skin off with a potato peeler. Do we have an understanding?" Yes, boss. Absolutely considered it done." Tony hung up and tossed the phone onto the bed. Clara sat there stunned. Her mouth hung open. The weight that had been crushing her chest for 2 years simply vanished. "You," she whispered, "you just—" "Why?" "Because," Tony said, reaching out to cover her hand with his large, warm one, "I don't like bullies, and I realized last night that I've been letting one live in my house for too long." Clara looked at his hand on hers. It felt electric. "What happens now?" "Now," Tony said, standing up. "You rest, and when you're ready, we go shopping, because I burned your uniform, and you are never wearing one of those again." "I can't accept this," Clara protested weakly. "I can't pay you back." Tony turned at the door, a small, rare smile playing on his lips. "I didn't ask for payment, Clara. But if you insist, you can join me for dinner tonight. Not serving it, eating it." He left the room, leaving Clara staring at the fire, her heart racing faster than it ever had in the cold. But downstairs, the atmosphere was far from romantic. Marco was waiting in the hallway, his face grim. "Boss," Marco said, "we have a problem." "Lana! Lana!" Marco nodded. She didn't just leave. She went straight to her father. And the Vances, they aren't taking the breakup well. The peace at the Moretti estate lasted exactly 6 hours. By early afternoon, the snow had stopped leaving the world buried in a pristine white blanket. Inside, Clara was tentatively exploring the library, wearing a cashmere sweater and jeans that Tony's assistant had miraculously procured for her. She felt like an imposter, but every time she passed a mirror, she saw a woman who was slowly coming back to life. Tony was in his office, the war room, staring at a bank of monitors. "They froze the accounts," Marco said, typing furiously on a laptop. "The Vance family bank handles 40% of our laundering operations. They've flagged everything for suspicious activity. The IRS will be sniffing around by tomorrow." Tony clenched his jaw. "I knew they would try financial blackmail. It's the only move bankers know." "It gets worse," Marco said, hesitating. "They've cut off the supply chain for the shipping containers in the Newark port. They're squeezing us, Enzo. They want you to crawl back." Tony slammed his fist on the desk. "I'd rather burn every dollar I have than marry that woman." "Boss, you need to see this," a security guard interrupted, pointing to one of the monitors. On the screen, a black SUV was pulling up to the main gate. It wasn't a tactical team. It was a single car. A woman stepped out. It was Lana. She was wearing a white fur coat and huge sunglasses, looking like a movie star. She held a large envelope in her hand and waved it at the security camera. "Let her in," Tony ordered, his eyes narrowing. "Boss, it could be a trap," Marco warned. "She's alone. Bring her to the foyer and keep Clara upstairs." 10 minutes later, Lana stood in the grand foyer, looking around with a sneer. When Tony descended the stairs, she smiled, a cold, calculated expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Merry Christmas, darling," she cooed. "You have 5 minutes," Tony said, stopping at the bottom step. "Before I have security throw you into a snowbank." "Always so aggressive." Lana sighed. She tapped the envelope against her palm. "I'm here to offer a truce. My father is very upset, Enzo. He thinks you've been irrational. He's willing to unfreeze your assets and forget this whole Maid incident if you issue a public apology and set a date for the wedding. Let's say Valentine's Day." Tony laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. "You think I can be bought? You tried to kill an innocent woman. Lana, we are done." Lana's smile vanished. "She's a nobody, Enzo." A servant And you're throwing away an empire for her. For what? A warm body in your bed. She has more dignity in her little finger than you have in your entire bloodline, Tony said. Get out. Lana's face twisted into something ugly. I thought you might say that. That's why I brought an insurance policy. She opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph. She held it up. Tony squinted. It was a grainy photo taken from a distance. It showed an older man walking out of a bakery in Chicago. He looked tired, wearing a worn-out coat. Arthur Thorne, Lana said, her voice dripping with malice. Clara's father, sweet old man, lives on 4th Street. Tony's blood ran cold. If you touch him— Oh, I don't have to touch him, Lana said lightly. My father has associates in Chicago. They're watching him right now. If I don't call them in— She checked her diamond watch. 30 minutes to tell them everything is resolved. They're going to pay Arthur a visit. And accidents happen so easily in the winter. Slippery sidewalks, gas leaks. You wouldn't, Tony growled, stepping forward. Try me, Lana hissed. You humiliated me, Enzo. You chose her. Now you have a choice. You can have your little maid, but her father dies. Or you can kick her out, send her back to the gutter where she belongs, and marry me. If you do that, Daddy Thorne lives to gamble another day. Tony froze. He was trapped. He knew the Vances. They weren't tough like his men, but they were cruel. They would hire someone to burn a house down with a man inside just to make a point. He looked up toward the landing of the 2nd floor. Clara was standing there. She had heard everything. Her face was as white as the snow outside. She was gripping the railing so hard her knuckles were translucent. Clara, Tony said, his voice cracking. Clara walked down the stairs slowly. She looked at the photo in Lana's hand, then at Tony. She saw the pain in his eyes. She saw the impossible choice he was facing. She walked past Tony and stood in front of Lana. You are a monster, Clara said quietly. Lana laughed. And you are a pest, a cockroach that needs to be crushed. Clara turned to Tony. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice was steady. Tony, you saved my life. You paid my father's debt. You gave me the best Christmas I've ever had. I won't let you lose your family's empire for me. And I won't let my father die. Clara, no, Tony said, reaching for her. Clara stepped back. I'll go. She looked at Lana. If I leave, if I disappear and never see him again, you leave my father alone. Clara, stop, Tony roared. I will handle this. You can't handle them without starting a war that will get people killed. Clara cried out, looking at him with tragic love. I'm just a maid, Tony. You're the king. It was a nice dream. But it's over. She turned to Lana. Call your men off. I'm leaving. Lana smirked, victorious. Smart girl. You have 10 minutes to pack your rags. No, Tony said. The air in the room changed. It became heavy, charged with ozone. Tony reached behind his back and pulled a gun from his waistband. Lana gasped. Enzo, you can't shoot me. I'm a Vance. I'm not going to shoot you, Tony said calmly. He walked over to the main doors and locked them. Click. He turned back to them, his eyes burning with a chaotic, terrifying light. You threatened my family, Lana. And whether she admits it or not, Clara is family now. He looked at Marco. Marco, lock the estate down. Jam all cell signals outgoing from this house. No one calls Chicago. No one calls anyone. Enzo, what are you doing? Lana shrieked, looking at her phone as the signal bars vanished. If I don't call in 20 minutes, then we have 20 minutes, Tony said, grabbing Lana by the arm and dragging her toward the library. Marco, get the team ready. We're going to Chicago. He looked at Clara. I told you I'd protect you. I meant it. We aren't surrendering. We're going to war. The library of the Moretti estate became a war room. The heavy oak doors were bolted shut. Outside, the blizzard had passed, but inside the temperature was reaching a boiling point. Lana Vance sat in a leather chair, her hands tied loosely with a silk tie Marco had provided not to hurt her, but to keep her from clawing at the specialized signal jammer sitting on the desk. She looked smug, checking the grandfather clock in the corner every few seconds. 15 minutes, Enzo, she taunted. You can't fly to Chicago in 15 minutes. Even your private jet isn't that fast. My father's men are already parked on 4th Street. If I don't call, they go in. Clara stood by the fireplace, shaking. She wasn't shaking from the cold anymore. She was shaking from terror. Please, she whispered to Tony. Just let her call. I'll leave. I'll sign whatever you want. Don't let them hurt my dad. Tony ignored her. He was pacing behind his desk phone in hand. He had unjammed a single frequency, a secure encrypted line that only he could use. You're right, Lana, Tony said, stopping to look at her. I can't get to Chicago in 15 minutes, but I don't have to be there to burn your world down. He hit dial. Who are you calling? Lana scoffed. The police. They're on my father's payroll. No, Tony said darkly. I'm calling a man who values money over laws, and thanks to you, I just made him very rich. The call connected. Yeah. Vinny, Tony barked. It's Moretti. Mr. Moretti. The voice on the other end was nervous but eager. I got the wire transfer. Generous. Very generous. The girl's debt is cleared and then some. We're square. We're not square yet, Tony said, his eyes locking onto Lana's terrified face. I have a job for you. A bonus. Double what I just sent you. I'm listening. You know where Arthur Thorne lives. 4th Street. Yeah, I know it. I've been, watching the place. There are 2 men in a sedan parked outside, Tony said, glancing at the description Lana had foolishly provided earlier. They work for the Vance family. In 12 minutes they are going to try to enter the house and kill Arthur. Clara gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Kill the old man? Vinny sounded offended. That's bad for business. He's a good earner now. I want you to stop them, Tony commanded. Take your boys. Go there, now. And Vinny, I don't want them arrested. I want a message sent. Understood, boss, Vinny said. The line went dead. Tony put the phone down on the desk on speaker mode. He looked at Lana. Now we wait. You're bluffing, Lana stammered, though her confidence was cracking. You called a loan shark my father hired professionals, ex-military. Vinny grew up in the Chicago gutters, Tony said, pouring himself a drink. Your professionals fight for a paycheck. Vinny fights because he enjoys it. The minutes ticked by. 10, 5, 2. The silence in the room was suffocating. Clara was praying her eyes closed tight. Lana was sweating her makeup, starting to run. Suddenly the phone on the desk buzzed. A call coming in. Tony answered. Report. The sound that filled the room wasn't a voice. It was chaos. Gunshots, shouting, the sickening crunch of metal on metal. Get off my block! Vinny's voice roared through the speaker, followed by the sound of a shotgun racking. This is Moretti territory now. More gunshots. A scream of pain that definitely didn't belong to Vinny. Then silence. Heavy, static-filled silence. "Vinny," Tony asked calmly. "It's handled, boss," Vinny panted. "2 guys, SUVs. They won't be bothering Arthur, or anyone else, ever again. And Arthur, he's fine. He's looking out the window, wondering why his lawn is on fire, but he's safe. I got 2 of my guys on the porch. Nobody touches him." Clara collapsed into the armchair, sobbing with relief. Tony looked at Lana. Her face had gone grey. "You missed your check-in," Tony said softly. "And your men are dead, which means you have no leverage left." Lana struggled against the silk tie. "My father will destroy you. He'll pull the bank funding. He'll do nothing," Tony interrupted. "Because 10 minutes ago, while you were gloating, Marco sent a file to the SEC and the FBI. Every dirty transaction your family's bank has laundered for the cartels in the last 5 years. It's all out, Lana. By tomorrow morning, the Vance empire will be seized by the federal government. You're not an heiress anymore. You're a liability." Lana screamed a primal sound of pure rage and defeat. Tony walked over to her and untied her hands. She rubbed her wrists, looking up at him with hatred. "I hate you." "The feeling is mutual," Tony said. "Now get out of my house." "It's snowing again," Lana spat. "Where am I supposed to go?" Tony walked to the window and looked at the patio, the same spot where he had found Clara freezing to death the night before. "I really don't care," he said. "But if you're still on my property in 5 minutes, I'm releasing the hounds, and unlike me, they haven't eaten dinner yet." Lana Vance, the woman who had ruled New York society with an iron fist, grabbed her fur coat and ran. She ran out of the library, out of the foyer, and into the cold, dark night, never to be seen in the Moretti estate again. 3 months later. The snow in Aspen had finally melted, revealing the lush green gardens of the Moretti estate. The windows were open, letting in the fresh spring breeze. Clara sat on the patio reading a book. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a soft yellow sundress that caught the light. She heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, familiar footsteps. "The daffodils are coming up," Tony said, placing 2 cups of coffee on the table. Clara smiled, marking her page and looking up at him. "They are. It's beautiful." "It is," Tony said, but he wasn't looking at the flowers. He was looking at her. It had been a long, difficult winter. The fallout from the Vance investigation had been messy. Tony had to restructure his entire business to go legitimate cutting ties with the darker parts of his past to ensure Clara would never be in danger again. It cost him millions, but he didn't care. "I spoke to my dad this morning," Clara said, taking a sip of the coffee. "He says Vinny came over for tea. Apparently they're watching baseball games together now. It's weird." Tony chuckled. "Vinny likes having a purpose, and your father makes good sandwiches." He sat down next to her. The tension that used to carry him like a suit of armor was gone. He looked younger, lighter. "Clara," he began, his voice turning serious. "Yes. I've been thinking about the contract." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "What contract?" "The employment contract," Tony said, reaching into his pocket. "Technically, you never resigned, and I never fired you." "Oh," Clara said, looking down. Do you want me to start working again? I can. I miss the kitchen sometimes." "No," Tony said. "I'm terminating your employment, effective immediately." Clara felt a cold spike in her chest. "You're kicking me out?" "No," Tony said gently. He slid off his chair, dropping to one knee on the patio stones. Clara gasped. Tony pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. It wasn't the gaudy, massive rock he had given Lana. It was an elegant vintage ring with a sapphire the color of the deep ocean, or perhaps the color of a stormy sky that had finally cleared. "I'm firing you as my maid," Tony said, his eyes shining with an intensity that made the world stop spinning. "Because I want to hire you for a different position, one that's permanent. No sick days, though." Clara laughed through her tears. "What's the job title?" "Wife," Tony whispered. "Partner. Queen. Whatever you want it to be. Just be mine. Please." Clara looked at the man who had pulled her out of the snow, the man who had burned down his own kingdom to save her father, the man who had warmed her when she was frozen. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Enzo." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Tony stood up and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her, and this time there was no cold, no fear, no darkness. There was only warmth. As they kissed, a single late-season snowflake drifted down from the sky, landing on Clara's cheek. It melted instantly against the heat of her skin, a final reminder that the winter was over and the spring had finally begun. What an incredible journey. From freezing in the snow to ruling the empire. Clara's story proves that sometimes the coldest winters lead to the warmest endings. Tony Moretti wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a man waiting for a reason to be better, and he found that reason in the most unlikely place. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about how much power you have, but about who you are willing to protect. If you enjoyed this dramatic mafia romance and want to see more stories about justice, love, and karma, please give this video a massive thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this story with a friend who loves a good plot twist, and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss out on our next gripping tale. Thanks for watching.